He is Ben Kingsley. We are the co-authors of the Armchair Guide to Property Investing and also the co-hosts of the Property Couch podcast. Now, last week what we did is because you're in isolation, what we thought we'd do is, we're socially distanced here, but because everyone's in isolation at the moment, we thought we would provide as much content as we could.
Totally.
So what we're going to do is we've got our best-selling book here. It's sold over 20,000 copies. And we are going to do the chapter highlights, Ben. We're not going to read it like an audio book, but we are actually going to go through the highlights. So last week, if you haven't seen that, you can go and check that out. But basically, we were talking about building your own knowledge base. So we went through some of the key items. We talked about the state of your wallet plays with the state of your mind, Ben.
Yes.
We quoted Dr. Kathleen Gurney about our feelings towards money. We went through a few key items there too as well. So go and check that out if you've missed it. But today, Ben, we're going to talk about the psychology of investing, but there's a very interesting backstory that comes with this.
Well, there is, Bryce. So the backstory goes like this. So, we were building a simulation software that measures cash flow movement every month. And we were trying it out in the early stages of building our property plans that we do. And it's fascinating, right? So when you get the power of compound and you get money movements, you get huge swings either way in terms of the impact of money, right? So when we started delivering these plans and doing advice and providing solutions to our clients, we were like, this is incredibly powerful because you can measure that money so you can see the income coming in, you can see the expenditure, what you got trapped and how you put it to work. So that is just incredible in terms of what it looks like. So we were like, we've got to share this. This is some fundamental pillars that absolutely need to be shared. So I'm like, Bryce, these are the 4 fundamental pillars. Pillars. And I said, I think we've got to call them pillars in the book. So that was when we were writing this part of the chapter and we were looking for a framework. I said, we've got to call them pillars. And he goes, and he had a better answer. What do we call them?
Well, it just gives you a bit of an insight onto what it's like to write a book with a co-author because 98% of it's fun. It's the 2% when you get a little robust on some certain sections. But we decided to call them levers instead of pillars.
Better name, far better name, because you can explain it better with actions, Bryce, can't you?
Well, you can, because the idea is that one of the things that we were really frustrated around was the fact that people would give sausage machine, cookie cutter advice where, prior to us doing the podcast and prior to us doing the book and things like that, quite often someone would say, I want to invest in property, and the person, typically a spruiker, would say, oh, that's great, I've got this property over here, you should buy this one.
Off the stock list.
It was so frustrating because just like a hat that is apparently one size fits all, Ben, it really doesn't tailor. So the idea of the 4 foundational levers is time, target, income, and expense, and we'll get you to define those in a sec. But to give you an idea of what that looks like, if you can imagine that you're in a bulldozer or a tractor or a one with a front end loader, and you've got 4 levers, and essentially you want to be able to tailor the hole that you're building in front of that particular piece of machinery to the specific needs that you want. You don't want to just say you can have a hole there and that's the only hole you can have. Because you want to move the lever forward, you want to move it back, you want to move it to the side so that ultimately you can get the hole delivered exactly where you want it to do. And that's kind of, I guess, the segue into what the definitions are.
Well, I think that's why it's the right naming, right? Because with those levers, I can do lots of things. A couple of levers can spin me around and the other levers can basically dig, build, whatever it is. And so when we did come down to sitting down with clients and we were building this particular advice piece, I always say to people, I said, I'm not going to be a life coach. I'm not going to be sitting here how you can earn more money and do all that type of thing. I'm trying to get to a situation where I can talk to you about the money that you have got coming through. And then I can talk to you about your expenditure in both essential and discretionary, but here's your lump sum of income, here's your lump sum of expenditure. This is the surplus that I've got to work with. And then when we started to model that out, that's about then putting leverage and 1 property, 2 properties, 3 properties, off it went. And so those were really powerful insights that people can give. But remember, we always talk about starting with the end goal in mind and reversing from that. So the whole idea of setting a retirement target from an income point of view and a time point of view, the other 2 critical levers, is that if you turn the working income off then that does obviously have a critical effect on how quickly the debt retires, whether you've got enough liquidity to get you through. And so one extra year of work at the end of the strategy is phenomenal in terms of how it can collapse debt or how it cannot. And so it comes back to a conversation around what are we trying to achieve here? And that's why it's not a cookie cutter model, because there's no one size fits all. This is a tailored conversation around your levers in terms of when do you want to retire, how much do you want to have, and then also looking at the expenditure today, tomorrow, and all of the changes that go in that. And it becomes, when you get a model like that, incredibly insightful to make the invisible visible, because you're able to play with those levers. So for me, it was a no-brainer. The customer could then see all of the aspect of it, and it needed to go in the book right up front, because that's, hence why it's chapter number 2, right? It's just a foundation understanding of what we were trying to teach.
Now, folks, we are talking about the Armchair Guide to Property Investing. I'm going to show you how you can get a copy of this later on, how you can get it for free, so stick around for that. But essentially what we're doing is we're going chapter by chapter to give the highlights and some of the stories and some of the backstory anecdotes on how we arrive. But I guess quite often the way that you can conceptualise how this might be important is because someone might come in at the beginning of their life cycle where they've got lots of time on their side, but they don't necessarily have the resources. They haven't had their home for a while. They may or may not be a property owner. If they are a property owner in the early stage of the life cycle, you may not have a lot of equity. Or you're in that early stage of building a career, you may not have the right income. Versus someone on the opposite end of the scale who's really reduced on the amount of time that they have. But they're in peak earning capacity, got plenty of equity in their house and all those sorts of things. So that's why this is so powerful, because ultimately this whole game, the subplot of our book is how to retire in $2,000 a week. Could be 3 for you, could be 1, could be $500, but whatever it is, there is this end goal where I want to create a lifestyle where I no longer trade my time for money. It's actually a passive result. That means that I can either roll over or roll out if I want to in the morning, Ben. I then know what that actually means for me, based on how much time I've got, what target I'm after. Because how many times have you got someone come in here and they read the book and they say, well, our target's $2,000 a week. Whereas other people say, you know what? Actually, I only need 60,000 in a year. I actually only need 40,000. So it's important.
It is, and the power of doing the simulation is to sort of say, okay, so let's split the difference. It's 80,000. If you worked an extra 2.5, 3 years, you could be in a position where that 80,000 could actually be 95. So it's not lineal in the sense that 1 extra year gives me an extra $5,000 or 2. It's actually like 1 extra year gives me an extra 10. 2 extra years gives me an extra 20. And we are talking about that being passive income over time, because what you're doing is you're either retiring the debt or you're effectively building an asset base through your accumulation phase that's bigger, that will obviously keep growing whilst you start to slow down in terms of your work requirements and your efforts. So it is unbelievably empowering to know what your scenarios are. And then you've got, how do you retire the debt out? Well, obviously that you can leave a legacy for the kids if you've got any, or you can just sell them down and basically go off and into the sunset in your Harley or whatever it is. So that's why, once we understood that these levers all play a role, getting them down and simplifying them for the average person to understand has been, I think, really important in terms of people being confident about moving forward with their investment strategy.
It's one of our foundational frameworks. It's a key one that you need to understand, because if you think about income, you kind of think, okay, what if I get a pay increase? But what about if you want to go on a sabbatical? What if you want to take 6 months off? What if you are in a commission-only position where in the high season you're earning this and in the low season you're earning that? Or what if you're like a real estate agent, is a good example, Ben, who last year's results are no guarantee of what this year's results are going to be. So you've got to be able to play with those fluctuations, be conservative. So that's around income. What are some of the things around expenditure, time and target that people should think about, Ben?
Well, I think from an expenditure point of view, it is the essential and discretionary, and being in a situation where you can understand what discretionary means and what essential means. I mean, even when we go grocery shopping, Bryce, there's a few little things that might land in the tray or in the trolley, I should say.
Nothing's discretionary, surely.
So my little sort of dark almond and dark chocolate and almonds sort of find their way in when they're on special. We'll get a few of those in the trolley. That's Obviously, discretionary spending, ice cream's discretionary spending, any type of confectionery, all of those types of things are discretionary spending. So you can even find value in terms of that. And it's amazing when you can model, okay, well, if of my $250 a week that I spend on groceries, $30 or $50 of that is actually discretionary. When we model the change to the overall wealth position of that particular person, it is quite phenomenal in terms of what that choice is to have that little bit now. Now, we're not saying it's all about waiting for retirement. So, you know, there's the expense piece. When we go to time and target, the first thing people talk about, Bryce, when they go to time and target is, well, as early as possible.
Yeah.
As early as possible would be good. And I always say to people, well, okay, well, I was mentioning before around how much income you want in retirement. It's like, what if you did work 1 or 2 more years, but your 80 went to 100, you know, went to $2,000 a week? All right, now you got me interested. And I think in today's terminology and the value of property as we see it today, you know, we wrote the book some 5 years ago. It's really important to understand that, you know, as a young person now, you might be thinking that home ownership is not in your reach, but the reality is you're going to live far longer than what our parents did and our grandparents before that. So you're going to be blessed with an incredible long period of time. So I think from a mindset point of view, I would be thinking that an early retirement is 65 because you're still going to have potentially 20 active years of retirement. Whereas when the government first introduced a pension, it was introduced when people retired at 60 and died at 62. You know, so it wasn't necessarily something that they expected to last for long.
It's a really important
point. It really
point.
is. And so we want to play with those levers to make sure, and you want to play with those levers when you're doing your own modelling in terms of what is important to you as you design the plan that you want to have.
Yeah, and the time really comes into a compounding effect, isn't it? Because the compounding is the eighth wonder of the world, so compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. So being able to eke another 1 or 2 or 3 years out, because people say, I want to retire by I'm 40. Well, just remember that there's no super that kicks in at that point. You've got to be able to get it to work. So a couple of things on the expenditure too, just to round that off.
Good, yes, please do.
Short-term, medium-term and long-term. So you've got to plan for kids, if you've got kids moving through different life cycles or based on what you want to do, upgrade your home. So the important thing that we wanted to reinforce with this framework and make it important right at the very beginning is that real life happens too. Yeah. Imagine that. Buying investment property, real life happens. You want to renovate the kitchen, you want to go on a holiday, you want to send your kids to school, private versus public.
You know, sort of religious schools, whatever that, independent schools, whatever that looks like. A nice rule of thumb today is around 400. So we have a range of, say, between 350 and 450 in today's dollar terms, where we are talking about. That's roughly what per child is going to cost for those discretionary and feeding, feeding those children per month, in addition to those school fees. And if there's extras like horse riding and certain specialised hobbies, motorbike interest, all of those things are extrapolated beyond that as well. So it's important to know, but that's a good rule of thumb to get people in that. So that's why when you're having children,
it's important to know.
It really is, because I mean that's one of the big things that we see people. If I had my way, Bryce, one of my best pieces of advice for anyone around money management is buy a home before you have kids, or get a deposit for a property and get into the property market before you have children, because it is going to be incredibly difficult to own property in a very, very wealthy country like Australia is and will continue to be if you don't do that. So I think putting the ducks in the right order will have a very material benefit for you and your happiness. Not saying that money is everything, but if you're struggling,
it's peace of mind
and it's really important. So if I can give one piece of advice in this Facebook Live right now, it's that please don't rush into the children program before you potentially at least have your foot on the property ladder. Because I think if you do have aspirations for the Great Australian Dream, that's one of them that won't get you there if you decide to have your kids before you do that.
Well said, Ben. So, folks, we are reading from our book. We're not reading from the book. We're summarising key concepts and principles from Chapter 2 of our book, The Armchair Guide to Property Investing. Stick around for just a couple more minutes. We're going to show you how to get a free copy of this book. But the last thing I want to talk about with this chapter, Ben, on that 4 frameworks is around the target. It's about being clear that, as we say, $2,000 a week. It's just really a title that we put there because it's common. But some people may be earning an income and expense and the time that suggests that target of $2,000 is woefully optimistic. Or on the flip side, you might have someone who's got so much time and so much reserve that $2,000 is woefully under what they could do. So the important point is around being realistic around what that target looks like. If we know what the income and expense is, and we know how much time you've got, then you can have a realistic conversation around, is that target $2,000 realistic or not? Because that's important. And I must admit, early on when I was investing, when I started my portfolio, I had really no idea where I was headed other than probably around the concept of he who dies with the most property wins. It was kind of this just massive game of Monopoly where it's just accumulation. Whereas now, once you know what that target is, once you know what you're aiming for, you got a very clear vision of what you need to do, what steps you need to put in the pond to be able to get to the other side.
I think what's a really good tip here is around the concept that replacing your income. So if you've got household income, net income of 100,000, that's the one to go after. I think what a lot of people who are on really good incomes, Bryce, are going to have a bit of a shock in terms of if they've got, incomes around that sort of 130 to 150 net of all costs. The challenge is going to be for those households is they're going to get a rude awakening if they haven't built up a wealth base. And so they're reliant on that working income as opposed to that passive income. So a good starting point is to try and at least have a minimum of 100,000 or whatever your minimum wage is that you're bringing in now in terms of net income, excluding mortgage commitments and kids. So that's a good way to start. And then anything above that is a real bonus, because what we don't want to see people doing is getting that real letdown around the idea that, well, I used to live really, really well when I was working, and now I've had to take the foot off the accelerator, because there is an expectation from those people that they're going to live the same sort of way, and they have a rude shock. So the earlier you start, hence that time, the more time we have, the greater the wealth we can build. That doesn't mean that if you're in your late 40s or 50s, it's not a good time to start building for 65. So you've still got 10 to 15 good years of being able to build some substantial wealth. And it doesn't all have to be in property. It can be in super or whatever the appropriate vehicle is for your circumstances and your risk profile. But that's the message I want to take for people. Is like 2,000 was a baseline for us if we've got plenty of time to work with you. But if we don't, just think about the income that you're currently earning. If you're satisfied with that gives you everything you need and you're happy, then try and at least hit that target as your starting point.
There you have it, folks. We are talking about concepts in our best-selling book, The Armchair Guide to Property Investing. We want you to get your hands on this. I'm going to tell you very, very shortly. But we just talked about Chapter 2, which is the psychology of investing, time, target, income and expense. Next Facebook Live, we are going to go through the 5 essential steps. And I've got to say that was a really cool part 5 years ago, Ben, when we got together and we thought, what are those steps that you need to take after each other to find that? We are super excited about that. But we are going to give you a copy of this book. We want to make sure that you can follow along with us because we've got 2 down, Ben, 8 to go. There's the 10 chapters. So if you want to get access to this book, we'll give it to you for free. So what we've done is we've gone to our publisher and we've asked for a few hundred copies. And essentially we've got them in the office here. So all we ask for you to do is to pay for the postage and the handling to get it out to you. All right. So if you want to get access to this book and you're prepared to pay the postage and handling, Ben and I have bought the book for you. We are going to send that out to you because not only can you play along for the next 8 chapters, Ben, but hopefully you can read that quickly and really fast track all of the knowledge that we pull.
And hopefully we consolidate that knowledge for you as you're going through it.
So where you can get that, folks, is if there will be a link here that you can see very shortly. It is the armchairguide.com.au.
There it is. It's up on the screen now.
There it is. Very good, Stiggy. Thank you for that. So if you go to the armchairguide.com.au, whilst there's still some remaining books, we're happy to send that out to you if you pay for postage and handling. So Ben, I'm excited about talking about that framework. That is a very, very important framework.
A critical framework for us.
So there you go, folks. We've done Chapter 1, which is building your own base, getting the headspace right, working out why you need to do it. Chapter 2 was the 4 foundational levers. Were going to be pillars, but became the 4 foundational levers that you must understand before you embark on it. And as I said, the next step is to show you the 5 important steps. So if you want a copy of this book, you just go to thearmchairguide.com.au. We'll give you a free copy. And if you want to catch more insights like this, we do a podcast every week, apparently, Ben.
We do. It's called The Property Couch, and it's Australia's number one property podcast, money and finance and investment management. So I'd love to have you along. Lots of hopefully valuable educational insights, and we get some of the best minds in the country to join us on the couch and share their views and insights. So, check it out.
We would love for you to check that out. So, folks, every Thursday at 3 p.m, you can check it out at thepropertycouch.com.au.